Hello, everybody. We are starting our new episode of Uncommon Man to Man podcast. I hope you've had a great week. This week, last week we talked a little bit of a darker subject than our usual with the pornography and the impact it makes on your life. So if you haven't listened to that, go back and check that out. And now this one, we're talking about being triggered. So, just
Happy
the
time.
same vein, exact same vein as Dark Topic. But
Well, this was about emotions and other things. This is not, I'm just OnlyFans dot whatever.
yeah,
So.
yeah. So this episode, we're talking about being triggered and mastering our emotions in a very chaotic world and what that looks like through a biblical lens, and what the Bible calls us to do when it comes to the emotions and temptations and anxiety, and just recognizing what control looks like to us as Christians.
Sure.
And so, that's kind of what this episode is about. And so I always find it funny. I always love the quote. I use it quite often as "Man plans, God laughs," right?
Sure.
We have this delusion of control that, well, I've planned my life out for the next 5 years. I know how many kids I'm having, what their names are, where I'm going to live, the kind of car I have, the job I have, the friends I have, X, Y, and Z.
Sure.
And then all of a sudden, Lord's like, "That's really funny. So
That's adorable.
you're going to Africa tomorrow. Enjoy the trip."
You still know it yet.
But it's just so interesting that control is this delusion, but it's almost like a I call them whoobies. They're not called whoobies. Like little safety blankets as children.
Little snuggies. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
little safety blanket kind
Yeah.
of thing, that we think we have control in a world where control is not a thing,
Yeah.
right? But we hold on to that, and then when we don't have it, anxiety strikes up, right? You're like, "Oh man, I thought I had the next 5 years planned out.
Doesn't God know I planned this out?
I plan to be a millionaire by 30. Lord, you only got 2 years left. Let's do this thing," kind of. But I think the interesting is that God does not call us to be in control of our lives so much, because it's chaos and things happen, and only God knows what's going to happen, right? But God does call us to have self-control and reliance on Him, and relying on Him in those moments where control is just not an option.
The last time we were in control, it was a couple of people in a garden, and look how that turned out.
Right. Exactly.
So we need a little bit of one of those bowling bumper rails. You know, we need some rails.
Some bumper rails and that little slide thing, and you just kind of line up and you let the ball roll
Yeah,
down.
right, yeah.
So how many safeguards can I put up?
As many as the Lord will give me.
Yeah. So.
Well, I often think of when the illusion of control, and we get anxious about that. I was trying to show Mom, she's a nervous Nelly, born nervous, and we're watching TV and I can hear her like clicking her fingers. I'm like, "Are you nervous about the thing?" "Well, yeah." "Are they going to find the right buyer for this house?" So, it's so easy for us to be triggered by something and then fall into anger or anxiety or insecurity, and it doesn't take very much.
No.
It does not take very much. We were looking for a vehicle. We were trying to buy a vehicle. This is a couple of decades back, and it was painfully obvious we couldn't afford a new vehicle. So naturally, every time I'd walk outside of my house, the parade of new vehicles would be lined up.
With the bows on top and everything.
Bows on top. TJ, look what you can't afford. It felt that way, right? So, competitiveness, insecurity would kick in. I'm like, I'm not asking for a Ferrari.
Yeah.
I'm just asking for a basic sedan or a minivan that won't explode when I turn the key, like I'm in a mafia scene. So it doesn't take very much.
Sure. I mean, anything from competitiveness, I think that a lot of that's baked into society too. As men, we are like, it's a lot of like worth is tied to like what can we provide, what can we get, that kind of thing. So competitiveness, I think, is really hard to, if you let it, it will consume quite a bit.
Sure.
But like anger, reacting, that kind of thing is very, very common. We always love the idea of that, oh, I don't let my emotions control me. But how often do we let missed sporting event touchdown thing and the curses
Oh.
start flying, right?
Oh my God.
Super
You
Bowl
and I
just
bo-
happened.
You and I both know somebody would peel the paint off the walls,
Right.
taking the Lord's name in vain over sporting events to the point of I can't be around that person watching that.
Right.
And so, oh no.
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
so, I mean, put your favorite thing there, right? Whether it's
Sure.
football, video game tournaments, whatever.
Yeah.
You know, letting, I mean, any of these emotions to an extreme extent cause so much turmoil in our lives.
Traffic. Uh-oh, now I've just gone to meddling.
I mean, whether it's competitiveness, anger, pride, insecurities. I mean,
Yeah.
all these things I think are so easy to fall in these traps of, because if you're not looking for them, these pitfalls are everywhere.
They're looking for you.
Right. And so our first verse in this first section is in 2 Peter 1, 5 through 7, if I can find it here. For this very reason, make every effort to supplement your faith with virtue, and virtue with knowledge, and knowledge with self-control, and self-control with steadfastness, and steadfastness with godliness, and godliness with brotherly affection, and brotherly affection with love. I didn't see anger or pride or conceitedness in that list anywhere, did you?
No. The fruits of the Spirit don't usually have that.
Yeah.
Now, I do have a different list that probably some people only know this list because of the movie Seven. And so I'm going to read off the 7 deadly sins and how they're rooted in temptation. I'm going to give you the sin. I'm going to give you a verse to look up, and then kind of a overview what that is. So the first one is lust. You go look up Matthew 5:8, the battle for purity. Gluttony, Proverbs 23:20 through 21, the overindulgence of anything. Ouch. Pride, Proverbs 11:2, ego over humility. Greed, 1 Timothy 6:10, chasing wealth over Christ. Envy, Galatians 5:26, constant comparison. Hello, social media. Sloth, Proverbs 13:4, avoiding responsibility. And wrath, Psalms 38:8, anger as a default reaction. And 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, God always provides a way of escape from temptation. So when we hear these 7 deadly sins, it's kind of the opposite, right? You hear the 10 Commandments, you're like, I can't keep any of those.
Yeah.
I have a hard time keeping one of those. And it says you break one, you break them all. Like, holy cow. I hear just the other side of this coin, the 7 deadly sins. I hear all that. I'm like, well, all those, I just checked all those boxes, right, in my life. And so how in the world do I overcome that and not be triggered by it? Because I feel like, okay, if I don't do this one, great. We got 6 more for you, T.
Right.
Waiting for you. So when we get triggered by something, you can look to that, but also look to those verses to see and put in a proper perspective that while it may feel very innocent, stuffing our face full of 35 muffins might be overindulgence.
Sure.
And fall into a couple of these categories.
Yeah.
So,
what I think is interesting about that is it's often when the 7 deadly sins come into play, usually there is like the 2 or 3 you're like, I don't deal with.
Sure.
I don't deal with flying off the handle of my wife. I don't deal with greed. I give constantly, kind of thing. And then there's that one that you get caught off guard with, lust or sloth. Of, you know what? I just don't do a whole lot outside when it comes to taking care of my house and the family. Or,
Right.
I love me, my hot dog eating challenge thing every Friday, or whatever the case may be.
Right.
And so I caution that when you're looking at this list, look at the full list, because if you just keep going, so you're like, okay, I'll jump lust and I'll jump gluttony, but sloth, I got sloth. We got one, yeah.
Yeah, right.
That if you don't look at the full list and look at what the Bible talks about how to avoid those temptations, getting a 50% completion rate on this test is not passing.
And these are the seven not so good sins.
Yeah.
These are the 7 deadly sins. All of these are detrimental to our walk with Christ.
Yeah.
And so when anxiety feels overwhelming, and a culture that deals with anxiety at a level, I'm sure my parents' generation had anxiety out the wazoo. That's when all the wars took place.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So
A lot of bad decisions were made just differently.
yeah, it just felt like, that case of cigarettes and Jack Daniels and all that kind of stuff, those were pacifiers, right? But anxiety doesn't need to be, it may not be as obvious, right? The devil doesn't come wearing a red suit and a pitchfork and horns, right?
Yeah.
A lot more subtle than that.
Yeah.
Kind of blends in. Health issues could be a trigger. Finances, relationships, negative thoughts, or overthinking. If overthinking was a superpower, I would be able to kill Superman by about 8:15 every day. Just
I'd sneeze in his direction. He'd pass out.
Right. Dwelling on the future instead of trusting God today. I don't think Mom has read any of these here, so I probably need to give that to her just so she can get a perspective. Since she suggested porn last week, I might give her this one this week. Matthew 6:34 says, "Do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself."
Yeah, I always think about Proverbs, and then we talk about the ravens that do not sow, nor the Lord provides for them still. The grass that's thrown in the oven tomorrow, kind of thing, is still there. I think it's easy to say these things, but it's very difficult to live out the idea of like, well, I know I shouldn't be anxious, and now that makes me more anxious, and then now I'm anxious again, and then I guess feel guilty about being anxious and that kind of thing.
Right.
It just kind of like perpetuates, and it takes a lot of spiritual maturity to get to a point where you can rely on God to that level where you're like, you know what, the Lord's got it, kind of thing. Sure. And I do think there's 2 ways to kind of go about. There's 2 extremes that happen. Either you become very spiritually mature and you kind of see like you've been through quite a bit and you're like, okay, the Lord's got me this far. Or there's no chance for anything to go good. So you're like, all right, well, the Lord's got it, kind of thing. I don't really know if either. I don't think that second one's really great, but it happens, right? Like you're like, well, I don't know how we'll get through this storm, right? The Lord's got it, kind of thing. But I do think this comes with time, practice, and then being in God's Word and seeing all the miracles and the things that God got these men and women through in the Bible.
Sure.
To lean on and see, well, Lord was with Jonah in that whale, and that impromptu cruise.
Yep.
I think the Lord can get me through this couple months of financial problems, or the last year of health issues, or whatever the case may be.
Sure.
Because from my little time on this earth, I've realized that there's no end to the list of things you can have anxiety for. Ooh. Like, it's not like, oh, I had anxiety about my health problems. Now that that's gone, I'm good now. Ding! Like, that doesn't happen, right? It's like, well, now I have to worry about, do we have house? Do we have food? Do we have enough finances for the future? What about kids? What does that look like? There's always going to be something to put your hat on when it comes to anxiety. And if you do that, you're going to lose your hair.
What are you trying to say?
There's a reason I'm letting my hair grow out. It freaked me out.
What are you trying to say? Picking on the ball guy.
But I think it's easy to do this like spiraling of anxiety. And unfortunately, there are many of us who struggle with it. I think more than others. Some are a little more
Sure.
predisposed for anxiety. I have a friend, and he knows who he is. He's a self-proclaimed worrier, and he gets in his own head a lot.
Sure.
And sometimes he calls me, and we have to have conversations where I kind of talk him off that ledge a little bit.
Right.
And that's what you're supposed to do, right? When you're having those moments, you have friends
Sure.
who kind of step in and kind of talk you off that
Kind of
ledge.
calm the waters a little bit.
Right. But what I think the biggest danger when it comes to anxiety, and I've experienced this with me and Heather, isolation. Anxiety and isolation is dangerous.
Sure.
Because you make bad decisions in a bubble.
Yeah.
Whether you go to your habits, your issues, or make bad decisions. Being in the presence of the people, being upfront and honest about your anxieties, that is truly the first step that needs to be taken right before taking it to God.
Yeah, I think that you can see that it's hard enough for us to, a person, individual, to kind of work through this list. Okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this kind of thing. And along comes Becky, and things go sideways. You're like, oh my goodness. Talk about if anxiety had legs. That is a person or a situation that shows up. You're like, oh my goodness. I'm just making a little bit of progress in myself, and then along comes this thing and just pushes me right back to where I was before. So identify what controls you, right? One, we have guys who reach out to us, and it's always interesting, like when we do something on finances, a guy will, you know what, thanks for that. I'm horrible with my money. Put out something on anger. A different person. Thank you for that. I'm really short-tempered, that kind of thing. So you can kind of see, identify what controls you. And before reacting, and this is where, count down from 10.
Serenity now.
Right, serenity. And then throw your first punch at 8 and never expect that, Pause and ask, am I glorifying God with my thoughts and emotions? And if we did that, none of us would ever have any problems.
Yeah.
But obviously we don't do that until probably after the fact, like, and pray and reflect and respond as the Holy Spirit directs. I mean, it's not as if the Holy Spirit is not, he's on board, right? He's there, dwelling in you. So everything you see or do or think, he knows. So it's not like you're like, oh, you know what? I was going through something. I tried calling God. I got a busy signal.
I was put on hold.
So I had to handle Becky myself. I gave her the rundown, right? I mean, the Holy Spirit is always there, the Comforter, right? So we have access to God 24/7. That's not the problem. It's our approach to this is the problem. And so we do have a devotion, and that's what this podcast is based around, and it's called Triggered. It's that giant brain sitting there with glasses on kind of thing. So if you get a chance to, either on the Bible app or even Olive Tree or Back to the Bible or our website, check out that devotion. It's free of charge, obviously. And be sure to check out uncommon.org. As you can see, we touch on these topics, whether it be finances or anxiety, PTSD, fear, porn, all of the great topics. Well, we're just a ray of sunshine, aren't we? But if you wanted some deeper content, the membership on our website is there. We have a monthly and an annual, and we think it's worth every penny for topics like this, because not everybody's talking about this. They're talking about, the world.
Yeah.
And so hopefully this is a little bit different. Dare we say uncommon. So be sure to check out our website. In the meantime, hang on for one of our sponsors. Uncommon would like to thank today's sponsor, Wilson Technology Group. At Wilson Technology Group, we're not just an IT vendor. We're your trusted business partner delivering exceptional support, innovative solutions, and peace of mind. One call, one team, all your tech issues resolved. All right, welcome back to segment 2 of our podcast on Triggered. I did notice that maybe because of the microphones are so good or the earphones, when you started, you had that kind of NPR radio voice. Welcome to the channel. Sit back and relax. The Moldies. I hope we don't sound like that. Hopefully it's kind of like we're modulating our voice so that, hey, wake up out there. Wake up out there. So our segment here, we're talking about capturing thoughts, controlling our words, and living in victory. Now, I don't know about you, but this model, sarcasm came standard.
Yes. Now that's my first language. My second language is English.
Right.
And that has gotten me into probably more than a dozen or so problems over my life. I mean, when I first started dating Heather, we had to have a conversation about, all right, you need to tone the sarcasm back down. Because sarcasm was a little bit of my love language of like,
Right.
well, I'm going to make fun of you a little bit. And she's like, I'm not dating you, so you can make fun of me and say mean things to me, even if it's joking. And yeah, so sometimes, and we were talking about this recently at our Bible study of like the danger of words, because there are moments where you're at like the coffee cooler or coffee shop or hanging with friends or at the water cooler, and someone says something, and I don't know you, but my brain goes, ooh, funny response, say it.
Sure.
And it doesn't think twice about what I'm about to say. And sometimes that can really, really like be like, well, that wasn't a Christ-like thing to say right there.
Sure.
Like that was not a good joke. Would that glorify God with my words right there?
No one's laughing. Why not?
So
That was funny. It was gold.
yeah, I think words have always been my big struggle with what self-control looks like, because I liked being the funny guy. I liked being the sarcasm. So I found value in myself in that. But that comes with a trade-off of all the things I'm saying, all the words that I'm saying, all the jokes that I'm telling,
Right.
is all of that glorifying the Lord.
Mom gets none of my jokes. None. Doesn't even get like funny memes. I'll have read this out loud. Knock, knock, who's there? It's always, kind of spoken like Stephen Wright. And it's just not there. So I have to turn that off, because if I do try it, like she doesn't get it, or she's like, well, that hurts full.
That's
I'm like,
mean.
I'm teasing. Well, I don't like that. Okay. So there's none of that. So the battle of self-control starts in our thoughts and words. If we don't capture our thoughts, they will control our actions. And if we don't watch our words, they will either glorify God or tear others down, like you were just saying.
Yeah.
And so the power of an uncaptured thought, the mind's the ultimate battlefield, right?
Yeah.
We have arguments, hypothetical arguments with people who may not even exist anymore. That like you're in the shower and like, well, if you're going to say that, then I'm going to say this, and I'll teach you to tell me that right there. And like, oh, that's right, that person passed away 3 years ago. Okay, I'm a goofball. So, if we lose there, we almost lose everywhere.
Yeah.
If we can't control our mind to some degree, it's challenging for us to do almost anything.
Yeah.
And you can see that when that person, we always see that plank, that speck in someone else's eye, and that plank in our own eye is invisible. But when you see someone, I always try to point it out for myself. Say, TJ, that's what that looks like. Don't do that. So, gotcha. I just need to see a sample of it sometimes. And if you're scrolling through social media and an ad, mercifully, we're done with politics. The election, at least. We're never done with politics.
Yeah.
But
Election ads are
election over with, thank goodness.
Yes.
But an ad or a post that stirs me envy or anger or lust, do you take that thought captive? Like maybe like you hide it. You want to block that thing. I don't want to see any more of that kind of thing. Because I've heard you're not responsible for the first look, but you are for the second. Someone shows up in a, the old Kanye West wife outfit. That first look, that's not on you. That's on that goofball trying to parade around as if it's normal.
Yeah.
The second look's on you.
Yeah, because the second, when you let that fester and continue, that's when you're making the conscious choice to entertain that thought, whatever that may be.
Sure.
And I think it's interesting to see kind of what that can really do to someone who they may not struggle with X, Y, and Z, but if you just let that thought fester and then you start thinking about that more and more, and you're like, oh man, that thing that I thought I was really solid in, I'm not as solid as I thought I was.
No. You run across someone, you're like, oh man, you know what? Oh, I'm going to try to have a positive outlook. You know, I'm not going to let things get me kind of thing. And you run across someone positive. All caps, bold,
With little sparkle
positive.
emojis next to it.
We have a friend that, holy cow, she doesn't have just one rose-colored glasses on. She has like her whole body encased in rose-colored glass. I mean, she's incredibly positive. So when you need some encouragement or just some of that, you go talk to her and you're like, oh my goodness, how wonderful life would be if
I'm
I
so
was like that.
happy I got jury duty today.
Right. That person's struggling with something else.
Yeah.
Right. But that is that person's spiritual gift. And so Matthew, was it 2 Corinthians 10:5?
We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ.
And Matthew 6:22 says, the eye is the lamp of the body. And so what we consume, we become. You listen to heavy metal, hardcore rap, and all of a sudden you're like, you know, these words that stick in your head, all of a sudden you find it coming out in how you speak. You're like, when did I start saying that?
Yeah.
Like, well, that's because you're taking in some content that is shaping how you see things, how you speak about things, how you think about stuff. And so,
Sure. I think we talked about that a couple podcasts ago about just everything and how it shapes our view of whether it's music, movies, and if you're not on guard and not holding those thoughts captive, what you expose yourself to will influence you, whether you believe that or not.
unintended discipleship. If you ever heard that one, that is a good one.
Yeah.
And so, do my words glorify God? Our words either build up or tear down, as Proverbs 15:1 says. This is funny. Types of speech that reveal our hearts. And when I was developing this, these are some of the things that came up. The angry Andy. These were like personas around personality stuff, you know?
Like the Inside Out characters.
I guess so. Angry Andy, always starting drama. Smarty Sam thinks he's always right. Keyboard Ken has to comment on everything. Political Pete, more passionate about politics than Jesus. And so, James 3:4-6 summarizes and says, our tongues are like a fire incapable of destruction.
Yeah.
And so I think you can kind of see that you can be triggered in all different kind of ways.
Sure.
And some good and some bad. Like that person who is positive, when they see something, they're triggered to be positive. And then there are things that trigger us to do the wrong side of that. And so our challenge for our listeners is, before speaking, ask, does this glorify God or just feed my emotions? Set boundaries for our thoughts. Cut off triggers that lead you into sin. If there are things that trigger you, take steps not to put yourself in that position. Again, you can't stop all the Beckys from coming into your life and turning life sideways.
Sure.
And you'll never stop Kanye's wife trying to get naked in front of you. But you are responsible to expose yourself to that. And if it wasn't for kind of a highlight of what goofiness happened, I don't even recall what quote unquote awards it was.
Yeah.
But it was something that all these celebrities were at. And if there's ever a please look at me crowd, it's these people.
Yeah.
And so take one action this week to strengthen your self-control. if you look at that list of the 7 deadly sins, you're like, wow, that's a hard list. Go find one that you do the best at and strengthen that. It's okay. I'm gonna make that one there. I'm gonna work on that this month. And I'm gonna take and make it even stronger. And then take the next one that's easiest for you, and then slowly work through that. And as you work through that, you will, and I will, become more spiritually mature. And as those things get harder, our faith will be stronger.
Yeah. I know one thing that's helped me through this, especially when I talk about people, including myself, because I can recognize that sometimes I'm a little more critical of other people.
Sure.
Not so much like calling them bad things, but like that turd over there kind of thing, and referring to people.
Right.
In our Bible study, we're going through James right now. One of James topics was about talking to other people as creations of God, and that's His handiwork.
Sure.
And how I should not be disrespecting God's handiwork that way, and how what the words I use reflect that glory that He is.
Sure.
Whether or not I agree that Becky's being a turd or not, that is still, reflection of Him.
Right.
And so
that He created.
Right. And so in His workmanship. And so I think that's helped me a lot curb my thoughts and words and referring to people, including myself, of like, I'm not glorifying the Lord by talking about myself or that person in that way.
Sure.
And in that negative way kind of thing. And so that little freebie in there.
Does this also hold true while in traffic? Because
the Lord did not bless you with blinker skills, I see.
Well, we work from home, so I'm not in traffic hardly anymore. When I get in traffic, and I'm a pretty patient person, get in traffic and I'm like, are you out in public by accident? Did you fall into the car and it started rolling? You meant to drive here, right?
How did you get here?
Right. Oh, if you're a driving instructor passing out licenses, shame on you. Shame. All 3 shame. Shame, shame, shame. You need to retest some people. Anyway, just having some fun. So our closing statement is discipleship is happening whether we realize it or not. And the world is teaching us to react emotionally, but God calls us to self-control, wisdom, and faith.
Yeah.
And so, as we always end it, please check out our website at uncommon.org and hit them with it.
If you're going to be something, be uncommon.